All right, Karl, welcome back to the show. How you doing, man?
Doing great. How are you, Jay?
Doing well. I think we've actually got our audio issues fixed for maybe the only time we have concurrently recorded with audio that sounds decent. For those who aren't aware, and this is super inside baseball, StreamYard, the software I use, incredibly convenient on the front end, but it will just decide that your volume isn't what it should be in any other app. So, sorry. I think we got it fixed this time, but yeah, let us know if it actually works or not. But how are you doing,
Yeah,
Karl?
doing great. I was just going to add browser-based everything is just the bane of existence because, it can work perfectly well one time and then you just need to actually just shut down and restart everything. You know, it's wonderful.
Well, and it's especially irritating because the one of the features of using it in a browser is it makes it very easy. Nobody needs to download anything. So particularly if you deal with older or less technologically inclined people, it's super helpful.
How dare you?
Yeah, but it also means that oh, cool, dude. This is a live show. This is actually live, not like most of the time I say live when it just means I am now producing or I'm now releasing it to the public. This is actually live. Uh, but basically it just means that everything it's supposed to do is optional. So, for instance, you're like, oh, wow, I recorded this. I would like to get decent audio quality. You might get decent audio quality 6 times out of 10, but that remaining four, it's like, who knows? But anyway, Karl, you came up at a recent outside appearance I did on
How dare you?
Lafayette, not Lafayette Lee, sorry, Lee Enfield of Ed Block Press, which for those of you who haven't heard it yet, I'll be dropping that episode sooner or later. A very, very serious podcast where we talked about very important things. Your love of 32 ACP came up, Karl. I think we were just slandering you the whole time.
It was utterly misframed. It's like people that talk about a book and the ideas based on the memes that they've seen without actually reading it. So I feel like I need to correct the record. It's funny. What I've learned from the internet over the past few days is that if I take a heroic dose of 5 dried grams of leucovorin, I may be at risk of losing my enthusiasm for 32 caliber handguns. It's a strong possibility. That's what I've gathered this week on online.
Yeah, so look, uh I'll be honest, Karl, that might not have been the most serious podcast
It
I've
was
ever been on.
hilarious, dude. I was laughing so hard. I was when Lee said or 25 ACP, I was just like so offended and I was like, "Oh, they're joking." And then he went on and a North African with a tummy ache standing on a folding chair killed a mayor of Chicago and hit 4 other people while trying to shoot FDR with a 32 caliber handgun.
I don't know
Laugh
why
riot.
the last words, which the whole commentary on this failed assassination, it's just the prosecutors just adding insult to injury. They're like, oh, this guy's borderline mentally incompetent, barely speaks English, schizophrenic. Can't wait to put him in the electric chair. Last words at this Italian anarchist. I quote, push a da button. That's just one of those like perfect anecdotes for American history. I was like, this couldn't be any funnier. Like at
The
every
the
stage,
most
it's
the most coherent, cogent, and highest English capacity of any Italian anarchist in American assassination and murder history.
well, I thought it was interesting, especially so quickly after this kind of raft of insane lunatic murderers. Where in a previous order, and look, to say I am not a fan of FDR is probably an understatement, but it is just nice to remember that we lived in a country where if you were a crazy person who killed someone, uh, we had no compunctions about giving you a trial that lasted a month and then strapping you up to Old Sparky. And I think that was a better country.
Yeah, 33 days after the event. keep
Yeah,
in mind.
exactly. Like, yeah, why do we need this to stretch on for years? Obviously, the schizophrenic Italian, he did it. Like, let's just get on with this.
Push the button.
Which is
So
sort of a. Oh, sorry. I'll let you finish.
I was just gonna say, so it is it's a wonderful illustration of the fact that our supposed issue with anarchism was literally just Italians. And 1933, was it 33 or 34 when this happened? That's very late in the game for the Italian anarchists still doing these things, because the vast majority of their activity was earlier. And they were, it wasn't just our Galician lawyers who caused the 1924 like immigration freeze. An awful lot of it was North African anarchists. So yeah, it's a crazy story, and people just forget that this happened all the time in that era.
Yeah, well, I mean, to that point, you and I got. I guess it's a point I made with Lee, but you and I both got to meet, Z-Man before his passing, and one of the things he would often bring up about immigration is immigration only stopped when rich people started getting hurt.
Yes,
Uh, and so if you import a bunch of lunatic anarchists who just want to murder rich people, immigration goes away very quickly. Uh, so
F and
I feel like
chat.
it's probably dangerous to explore that idea to its logical conclusion
Yes,
on YouTube. So I
we
will put a pin in it.
disavow.
Yeah, of course.
We
We
disavow,
disavow Italians, the political stuff.
but not
So very
32
determined.
caliber handguns.
Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of other mysterious assassinations of the time, have you ever gone through the Huey Long assassination?
Yes, yes.
What was the
Speaking of
name of his
Galician
assassin?
lawyers, he was a Galician lawyer.
Yes. It's actually a funny detail. I've only had Christopher Sandbach on my podcast exactly one time, and it was just a bad. I was sort of out of it. I've been working a long, a long shift, and I had a very long intro to a question about Huey Long, but instead I asked it about Huey Lewis, and to give him credit, Sandbach legitimately tried to answer that question as asked.
That
And
rocks,
it is
man.
I don't even know if that episode is available anymore. Uh actually speaking of weird connections, do you know what Huey Long was shot with?
Uh, no, I know it
An
was a
FN
handgun.
1910 in
Ooh, ooh,
in 32
ooh,
ACP.
ooh, ooh. I disavow the shooting of Huey Long with anything, particularly a small
See, the FN,
caliber. The 1910 is a great pistol.
well, it's also a very many assassinations done with an FN
Yes,
1910.
yes. Because there were
Obviously,
bazillion point five of them. There were so many of them that they made.
yeah, it's sort of an interesting. Yeah, sorry, that's just an interesting detail. I hadn't really remembered how many.
If you're
Cool dude
thinking,
for five.
sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
this is just a compliment to you. Karl's work on the Spanish Civil War has been very helpful. Needs to be better understood in the Anglosphere. Good show. Well, I appreciate it. I would
Thank you.
really hold that praise for a little longer because we're only 10 minutes in. We have a long time to disappoint you.
There is much ruin in a nation. So
There's much
so
ruin in a live stream.
so Karl Austin Weiss was a Galician lawyer born in Baton Rouge in 1906. He died in 1935 in Baton Rouge of gunshot wounds in
Well, I mean,
response to his assassination of Huey Long.
died due to gunshot wounds is perhaps an understatement.
Yes,
Uh, Lewis's goons just sprayed him with fully
yes.
automatic fire, making him almost unidentifiable.
So Long's bodyguards were nicknamed the Cossacks or Skull Crushers, depending on who you talk to. Both wonderful nicknames. Vice bought this FN model 1910 pistol for $25 while in Europe that he used in this assassination. So interesting.
I am I tend to sort of follow the official line on most assassinations, or at least more so than most people. The Huey Long assassination, highly suspect, like incredibly suspect. The official story does not necessarily hold up. It's been a while since I've gone through it, but effectively, it seems as if this guy Weiss just got up one day, said goodbye to his wife and infant daughter, and then just walked into the Louisiana State Capitol, shot Huey Long, and then was completely and totally riddled with bullets. And they just tied everything up in a bow and said, "Oh, I guess he's dead.
I
It's
guess
over
that's
now."
it. Yeah, so
Yeah.
so for all the internet addicts out there, Jay just illustrated something very important, which is that the actual killing of the assassination is like a tiny element of it. And the lack of investigation behind that is where the investigation behind that and the real motivations, other than tummy aches, are really where the important stuff is. Just like Charlie Kirk, the people who are coming up with these elaborate, ridiculous conspiracy theories based on like a single, like a black pixel in a single frame of a video after they've watched thousands of hours of video of the same thing, like warping their minds, when you have something that's a little more straightforward, but there is a lot behind it. And that's where the real story and argument is that you create this environment, and the people creating this environment, and probably people grooming online, because as we know, I mean, we're all internet addicts here. Like, we know that if you go into a Discord, with a group of, let's say, friends with common interests, it won't be long until someone comes along and is like, "Hey, I thought you were a real true believer," with a V for the U, and they're basically like trying to, get you to engage in really stupid behavior. Yeah, it's so yeah, that's what I just want to point out as it relates to that.
Yeah, and that's sort of an interesting point. There is, and I can't remember who I stole this from. It might have been Ryan Dawson, but he talks about sort of the loose change version of a conspiracy,
Mm,
uh, where it is sort of deliberately stupid and obtuse way to shift focus on an obviously suspicious event.
yeah,
Where, okay, there's a lot going on there, but if the focus can be shifted to, oh, were the towers holograms? Was it a bomb hitting in the building? Was it a cruise missile? All that sort of stuff. Instead of, well, then why did this happen? Or who
yeah,
knew about this before?
yeah,
Which is where the actual information lies. It's actually part of the reason why I haven't said very much about the specifics of the assassination per se. Uh, because one, it seems as if this issue is still very much in flux. Two, uh, there are a lot of people saying a lot of things, and I find a lot of the narratives very unconvincing. And to me, it's almost there is an under there's a desire on the internet to have a take on everything, even if you don't necessarily have something to add to the
ding
discussion.
ding,
And sometimes you're much better served by simply not saying anything until you're actually sure. So, for instance, in the case of the Kirk case, like you and I could go through, do what you said, kind of analyze the video in Zapruder film-esque fashion, speculating on exactly what happened. Probably do immense psychic damage to ourselves and not
exactly.
really add anything to the conversation.
Yep,
Whereas if you're looking at this and say, okay, well, like let's set the why and how of the preceding events aside, come back to those later. The reaction is something that is completely exoteric. Like we can see the reaction from American political actors and go in that direction. And I'm not necessarily interested in like conspiracy checking people or saying don't question things, because it is very weird how there was one particular narrative in general, which even before anything had happened, we were assured by, shall we say, Galician lawyers. There was absolutely nothing there. Read between the lines, you'll see what I'm saying. That's weird.
Yeah.
And that definitely deserves deserves a long, hard look. But anyway, I don't necessarily know what I have to add. So that's probably a bit of a ramble for me, Karl. I'm curious what you
That's
think.
okay. I do want to point out that I bet you were thinking of Gavrilo Princip when he assassinated Archduke Ferdinand using an FN 1910, but he used a 380.
Lame. Yeah, anyway, so it's enough about that. It is sort of an interesting transition, and I'm curious if you see this, that it seems as if the sort of classic school shooting is sort of passé among the lunatics who commit these acts.
Mm,
And I sort of wonder if these sniper political assassination attempts are the next, are sort of the next cool thing, right? We had serial killers for a while, that got boring. Then it was spree killers. Do you think that there's, and I guess this is unknowable, at least as of current writing, but do you think there's something to that? Like, is that the new mode of expression for
I
these
think
guys?
so. I think so. And I have to be very careful in the way that I phrase this, but the level of nihilism that drives a school shooting type of a situation, or like a public massacre, whatever it is, whether it's like a mall food court or something like that, is a high level of antisocial nihilism that drives that, right? And this sort of stuff provides the illusion of legitimacy and like elevating. I can see how a person can interpret like the kind of celebrity or importance that you get from these things, because they're like, that guy's a legend, he goes on forever. Whereas people instantly forget the school shooters because, in the old days, like the media focused on them so much, but the news cycle is such that only like a narrow group of fans like pay attention to this stuff. If you remember, was it the Catholic school incident, and the I know we're on YouTube, the wee chopping gentleman who conducted it, basically followed more of like a school shooter fandom behavior by like writing stuff on the weapon and magazines and everything, and like had all these like classic memes. There was a KMFDM reference, which goes back to Dylan and Klebold. Borzoi did a really good write-up on this on X around when it happened, because he had delved into the kind of school shooter fandom like discussion group stuff in the past,
Yeah,
and read
they
books
call
and
it
was, yeah, very
they call
educated
it
on the subject.
they call it like shooter core.
Yeah.
Uh, and as with all of these things, it's difficult to say how much of it is edge for edge's sake, how much of it
Yes.
is legitimate. And I think what's indisputable is that even if many people are there just out of morbid curiosity or to be edgy, there are those who don't get the joke, who
Yeah.
go through with it. And there are bad actors there, some of them connected to government, some of them not.
Yes.
Obviously, this is where the 09A and 764 stuff comes
Ding
in, where it's
ding.
like, how much of that is real? How much of that is federal entrapment? Does it really matter? It sort of leads to the same place.
Correct.
But to your point, I think that the danger of especially radical trans stuff and the kind of like armed queer movement cannot be overstated.
100%.
The last, actually, especially in your neck of the woods, Karl, I won't reveal it, but like
Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. Well, I mean, that could describe like 10 different places in
Yeah,
America,
exactly. Yeah,
right?
I know. No,
But
it's true.
the the most recent episode of the New Founding podcast spoke with an anonymous guest, anonymous in the sense that he's a recognized person in a field where can't show his face.
Yeah.
Talked about this. Uh, some parts of it were a little didactic for my taste, but nonetheless, he goes into the genuine like danger of the Tranissaries, and he includes a anecdote that Karl, you and I, given our experiences, have likely seen as well, which is the sort of heavily armed trans activists
Yes.
training,
Yes.
like genuinely doing the sort of like react to contact, small unit tactics. Okay, are they by and large incompetent? Yes. However, that indicates both a certain level of capability and organization and also desire. And
Motivation.
as we've
Yep.
seen, even a lunatic, when armed and well prepared, can do an immense amount of damage to a soft target. So that danger is very real. Uh, I think as well, when we talk about that, the desire of those sort of people, however you want to look at, their spiritual affliction or mental uh, unwellness, combined with political radicalization, right? You ought to uh, do something. If you don't, Orange Cheeto Hitler will put you in a camp and kill you, right? That sort of language, and the nihilism that you mentioned, and that sort of got to be taken as a nasty word right after the shootings. People were saying like, "Oh, you're trying to let people off the hook by blaming nihilism," and it's like, okay, that's not the point. But to say there are a great number of people who do
Yeah.
live pointless lives, and what
Yes.
meaning they have has been given to them by radical politics that says, like that meme making fun of the right initially, you know, message received, like I know what I've got to do. Again, most people get it, but for those who don't understand the sort of buried implicit premise, they do go ahead with that. And yeah, man, I mean, I think that we're going to see a lot of that kind of propaganda of the
Un-
deed as a
yes.
previous era of leftist would
Exactly.
call it.
And as we, as I've talked about, extensively around Spain and the lead up to the Spanish Civil War, there is a break that happens where these things become irreconcilable. And my concern is that, like, we are there, and we're going into that period, and I still think it's much earlier. There's a lot of room for a lot of problems. People will point out in the 70s that we were having, like, what is it, 5 bombings a week from leftist radicals or something. There's a lot of room for that kind of stuff to take place in America. And you know and it's even, it punches way above like the counts, and incidences in America in the current year, plus 10 or whatever we're in right now, because of media, because of the internet, because it's immediately out there and people see, 4K, visuals of it immediately. And, in Spain, there were decades of street fighting and assassinations and just, political violence. And then things that would happen, whether economically or the state would like do a good job of cracking down on it. And then in the 20s, you had the dictatorship of General Primo de Rivera, which is, they make it the bad guy because you have to like focus on the quote, the bad guy, in leading caps. And it really was just a military dictatorship where they squashed leftist street violence and right-wing street violence as well, where they were like, no politics, we need to put a damper on this, things are getting out of control. And as soon as they took that, the lid off of that in late 1930, it just went nuts. And it's because there was a major split in the society between like the traditionalists, traditionalist Catholics, although this is a big swath of categories, and then kind of like mainstream peaceful liberals, and then the far left that was just like revolution And that was a major portion of the population. It was like 20% of the population were leftist revolutionaries. So it's hard to say, like, and I don't want to be dismissive, and I also don't want to exaggerate it, but like, the only thing that you can do is have massive state power squash this stuff, because if you let it continue, this like mini brush fire that we're seeing, like, it will just like roll and grow and build into something that it's going to be inescapable.
Well, and this is I'm glad you brought up the kind of like hatred towards. Effectively, what I'm trying to say here is that democracy is when progressives win, fascism is when they lose.
Yes.
I was talking with someone close to me about this, and I sort of flippantly said something similar, and they're like, "Oh, well, what is the difference between democracy and populism?" Uh, and of course, that's something that's been hashed out many times. Again, it is that similar friend enemy distinction: do we win or do we lose? There's no principle in it per se. And when we consider both, what is it called when the left loses? Well, it's called fascism. It's called a dictatorship. And also, you look at the way that the shooter and then many of the people speaking about it as well talk about Charlie Kirk, a relatively moderate figure. It is clear that those words, fascist, Nazi, dictator, whatever, have almost no meaning absent, or no functional meaning absent, your relationship to the left and leftist political power. Yeah, sure, there's a dictionary definition. Oxford can define all of those terms. But in sort of a functional sense, it's entirely dependent on the convenience of the moment. And so, again, when we talk about how to deal with these people, you sort of have to realize that the slings and arrows, the terms that they throw at you are ultimately meaningless. Every insult simply means, I don't like you, go away. And I think there has been a realization of that point on, words like fascist or Nazi or even racist, that effectively all of those terms only mean, I don't like you, you won't let me do what I want, so go away.
Well, they used to be honest about this. That especially from our mutual friend Thomas loves pointing out that when they call everyone a fascist, we have a, like you said, we have an Oxford dictionary or a Julius Evolian, conception of what fascism is, where it's this specific map, and the conservatives get it wrong because they're basically like, it's just another kind of left-wing thing, a socialism, and the left correctly, knows and understands that it's anyone who gets in the way of the process of like historical evolution towards the correct final communist victory. And that's their conception of it, is that you're interfering with the historical process, and therefore you're an enemy, and you're also a class enemy. So it's in their conception, like, the left is correct in the way they use it, or I should say, they use it in the same way that it was used in the past, where everyone that was opposed to you was a fascist, because they're fighting against, the correct conclusion of history.
I've been rereading The Dark Enlightenment by Nick Land. One of my favorites. I probably go back through that book every year or so. And one of the things that he talked about, he was writing during the height of the Trayvon Martin case. And I think that he was accurately identifying something, although I think, at least to some degree, it's changed. He was talking about why do liberals love talking about race? Why is it something that they bring up all the time? And his answer was, well, because they win. That's their win button. When they drag the conversation into that term, or into those terms rather, into that sort of bounded rationality, to use a Thomasism, they've sort of set the ground. They will win. You may have heard Dave, the distributist, talking about this with politics writ large. Why do particularly progressive women love talking about politics in social settings? because when they do, they are rewarded. They
Yes.
win. And that depends on, again, that mechanism we've been talking about of sort of owning the ground and being forced to make your nominal opposition, the loyal opposition, the sort of designated whipping boy court jester condemned to eternal embarrassment, on side. And I think that as this violence continues, even if there is not some, sort of boomer waffen civil war, 1776 will commence again kind of ridiculous situation. They are ultimately undermining the moral authority they use to win in the short to medium term by basically making it very clear that everyone is a fascist who is a legitimate target for
Yeah.
violence.
Yep.
Do you see what I'm getting at there, Karl? Is it too vague?
Absolutely. No, it's just a villainization, othering, and trying to identify enemies, and the details. We will try to parse them or pick nat shit out of pepper, but that's all it is, right? Like when it comes down to it, is that they're basically identifying the sides, and they're saying if you good guy side, you go against bad guys, and it just justifies everything.
You may have given a speech at an event talking about the need for sort of a big tent approach to this.
Yes.
I was really disturbed and disheartened by the reaction to a recent attack at a Church of Latter-day Saints. I think I get the terminology slightly mixed up on that. Uh, I'm not a Mormon. I don't view them per se as the same thing that I am. However, I think we need to recognize the fact that they see us as the same thing, however you want to define us. They put all religious people, particularly religious people of a European
Exactly.
extraction, on team bad. So, what theological differences there are, and there are quite significant theological differences between me and the followers of Joseph Smith, that almost doesn't matter in the short term. And it's particularly disheartening and monstrous to see those sort of differences being hashed out while the bodies are still warm, so to speak. And so, Karl, I'm curious, one, could you sort of summarize your argument maybe from a historical perspective on the
Sure.
need for big tent politics? And also, what could be the sort of what could a resistance be organized around? Do you think that simply opposing the left is enough to form allies over?
I do. The successful case and illustration of that we have is Spain. Um, you know, early 20th century, when various fascist groups, like literally ideologically and image aligned, was a very small segment, but it was sort of carving out where I don't want to be too dismissive because I like them in a lot of ways, but they're kind of like, here's our special boy, like, highly intellectual and relatable to the left argument against the left, right? It's educated people understand that fascism is a reaction to communism, and it really is in terms of the images and the phrasing and the concerns, the social concerns and the justifications and arguments. I'm very sympathetic to those. I think it comes from a really good place, genuinely. Whereas like the traditionalists are like, everything is fine the way it has been, and fascism basically says the way it has been, but that's gone in so many cases, so we need to like kind of attack from both ends. And what took place in Spain was that all these different groups came to realize that they were under attack by the same people, and that they were not each other's enemies. So a fascist, which at the time typically meant like an educated member of the urban or suburban middle class, who had who had a deep understanding or a better understanding of the leftist arguments against tradition, and said there's some good arguments there, but the overall argument is actually anti-civilizational. And so we need to basically find something that works for everyone, no matter what class they're in. Because again, as a reaction to communism, socialism, anarchism, fascism has to use some of their arguments and language. Anyhow, between the military and a vast slew of political parties and social movements, really ending up centered upon the Catholic Church and Catholicism, all these people came together and said, we will work together. We don't have arguments against one another. Some of us are more powerful and have more influence in different parts of the country and in different settings, whether it's urban or rural regions, because the more hardcore traditionalists had massive numbers in the northern Spain, and less so in other parts of Spain. But they all basically said, let's begin working together behind the scenes, in particular, and come up with a plan, because this is just going into a disastrous area. And as the left saw more and more success with through the vehicle of the Spanish Republic and the government, which in frame, to summarize it, it's anarcho-tyranny, where the state would basically place conditions that were exclusively imposed upon the right, whether that's banning public displays of Catholicism, like on feast days you can't have a religious procession, all the church property, meaning churches and cathedrals and everything, monasteries, etc., were nationalized. And so the individual churchgoers had to have their tithes go to pay for rent from the state for use of these buildings, otherwise they can't use them, etc., and seriously restricting all church activities. Like they banned religious schools, so like you couldn't have a Catholic private school anymore. So all these impositions by the left, and so it was enforced by the government and by mobs. So mobs would run in and burn down churches and monasteries and sack places and attack and kill priests and so on. And if the right reacted, they would get arrested. Does that sound familiar? Right? So they figured it out fairly early on, and it took some time for all these groups to coalesce together, but they had done so, and they had a plan, and they were all working together in common. The same, let's say that the time for politics was somewhat over by late 1934, and everyone recognized that. So behind the scenes, the other expression of political power became the focus of the right's organizing and funding, rather than and as well as the propaganda angle, because they needed everyone to kind of get on the same page. So they were very successful in that, and it's again one of the cases of the few successful resistances to communist insurgencies and revolutions in Europe. In that period, I should say, that escalated to that point, because we know in Germany, for example, you would have, was it Bavaria had a very brief period that was communist, and then the Free Corps came in, right? And so it's one of the few cases where it was like a full-on revolutionary war that was underway, where the right won. In contrast to the Russian quote unquote revolution. So all very interesting stuff. Our sphere has great podcasts on all these topics. Pete Quinones is like a great hub for that, and his various guests. I've done a ton of shows with Pete. If any of the listeners aren't familiar with the topic of the Spanish Civil War and you're interested, just on YouTube you can look for Pete Quinones, Karl Dahl, and there's tons of stuff that we've done on that topic.
Yeah, so I think I'm glad you brought up the anarcho-tyranny element of it. And look, part of that is effectively disregarding even the fig leaf of equal application of the law. There are several things to look at that, which is one, the short to medium term, which is that they can hit you, you can't hit back. In America, due to, should we say, demographic concerns, there's sort of 2 points to that. There is the direct violence and agitation of far left actors. The Antifa stuff, currently the people fighting it out with, ICE and CBP, but also the kind of guys who chased Milo off the, college campuses, who get up to that sort of nonsense. We could say that's sort of the active part. But additionally, the passive is sort of the baseline background radiation hum of American crime and violence. The several dozen murders a day, the kind of what we saw from that, light rail in Charlotte, right? That arena getting stabbed. That is another element of it as well.
100%. And I'm glad you're pointing that out. Thank you.
And those are slightly different, but they are ultimately extensions of the same thing. And there's a short term and a long term, I guess, way to look at that. The short term is that they are in a position to mess with you. They can hit you and you can't hit back without, at the very least, getting dragged through court and your life nearly ruined. Citation, Daniel Penny. Citation, Kyle Rittenhouse. Even if you are in a court of law proven to have acted within the confines of what is illegal at the moment, you're not going to go back to being a normal person. But is this the actions of a strong state playing a long-term game? I contest not, because you are, even in a small way, giving up the monopoly on violence. What we've seen now is that, in a large part, giving up the monopoly on violence. And in addition to giving up a core element of sovereignty, although at least in the active version with like Antifa and the other things, you could say, like, to what degree are they really separate from the state?
Yeah.
Sort of paramilitary, but maybe that's a discussion for another time. But also, you sort of killed the golden goose. And this is one of the many ways in which the left, particularly after the Cold War, kind of couldn't help itself, is that they have killed the loyal opposition, literally as well as figuratively. They've killed something that, you sort of couldn't wish for. An opponent who gives you exactly what you want all of the time. But because that wasn't good enough, you had to both have that and also just kill them, make their lives a living hell whenever you felt like it. It's like they couldn't just leave it at a slow boil. They had to, turn the dials all the way to the left. And I think that is, when we're talking about the consequences of narco-tyranny, it is coalescing opposition. It is coalescing, or making people realize the consequences for sort of going along with the game as it stands. And people will say, oh, are you saying there's going to be a civil war? There's going to be a rebellion? No, not at all. But look at Trump 2024. Why was he effectively sort of wafted into office? Well, it's because he had a lot of support. Now, was some of that from Galatian doctors and lawyers, right? The oldest lobby, or one of the most powerful lobbies in Washington? Certainly. That's part of it. But as we said earlier, talking about why immigration stopped in the US, things got dangerous for rich people.
Yes.
As I've said multiple times, if you are a tech billionaire and the DMV administration says that you need to have DMV Americans at every part of your organization at XYZ percentage, well, suddenly you're no longer, Vingo, I'll explain it to you. Suddenly you're no longer you have a competitive edge. So it became life or death. It became existential, one might even say. And again, the sort of violence we're seeing increases the realization of the consequences of losing. It is no longer that you lose in a preferential sense. Like Karl, you and I might get into an argument about what movie we're going to watch, and if you lose, you're watching, something you don't want to see. Whereas if you and I are losing in Russian roulette, that's a dramatically less pleasant outcome, right? The point is, by raising the temperature in that way, they're setting up incentives to form a coalition to oppose them.
Yes.
So yes, if you see what I'm sort of trying to outline there, Karl.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree utterly. They delegitimize the process and the state. Like, you can't invoke, our democracy and our Constitution and our Bill of Rights if you violate it flagrantly on a regular basis. Like, your whole thing is about violating it and mistreating the people that pay for everything, right? Like, it's totally transparent. If your state becomes about hostility towards the people who descended from the people who founded the state, like, you're going to lose them in huge numbers, as well as everyone that just likes, a functioning society. So that's where you get this coalition behind Trump. And it's so interesting to see the actual arguments that people made, as to why they supported Trump when, 5, 6, 7 years ago, they were completely opposed to him. Because at the time, 6, 7 years ago, there was no cost to being completely opposed to Trump. In fact, it benefited you greatly socially to put on a little display of how you opposed, Trump and the kind of people that supported him. And after the Biden man's administration, like, delegitimized themselves and stupidly did all kinds of, like, choosing sides and creating enemies that they paid no attention to. Like, Mark Andreessen's a great example. If you listen to Mark Andreessen talk about how he made this switch, it's a wonderful illustration of how things actually work in the real world. People, the memescape of what people would call, like, our sphere, if you go back 10 years, is so full of really stupid ideas that had explanatory power at the time, because they weren't really being challenged. But now you see how wrong they are. Like, people would talk about, like, the mono state, like the system. I read something this morning where someone said that, let's just say, WN type people, everything that their whole plan has always been based on step one, society collapses, because they were so marginalized and they had no plan and they had no way of communicating. They were so defeated that you have to start with a premise that gives you that space to operate in. And the only way that they could conceive of it is society collapses, which is a cope. It's not a plan, it's a cope. And so, we have all these really bad ideas baked into us that are just stacked on each other from the past, which is so refreshing about people who are kind of newer to this scene and people who are younger. For me, like, again, I'm mid-late Gen X, and so I've been hearing this shit for decades, and almost all of it is nonsense. It's like, society's going to collapse, and now we'll have our space to move, and it's like, that's not a plan, man. So anyway, point being, like, there's a lot of preconceived notions that everyone has, and it's really important to step back and look at these fundamentals. And the reason people are going back to fundamental thinking, or writers who talk about fundamental thinking, people roll their eyes in our circles when mold bug is invoked a lot of the time. But one of the good things about mold bug, one of the key things that I think that people miss, is that he would go back to fundamentals and would talk about fundamentals. And it's really critical to think about fundamentals. That's why guys who are talking about, you need to actually read Greek philosophy and understand the arguments. Thomas is doing a great series on philosophy and kind of the history of philosophy and evolution of it with Pete. And that is so good for people to get a taste of what's being talked about, because when you communicate in memes, like, you don't have the whole story. You don't have a good, solid understanding most of the time of what is being discussed. And you can't even begin to perceive the world if you can't step back and reassess based on these fundamental principles. And you almost never see fundamental principles in modern politics anymore, especially on the losing side, where the winning argument is, or the argument and the side that's beginning to win. You see JD Vance invoke fundamentals, for example, all the time. When they hit him with some, memeplex that's been around forever, thinking they'll neutralize him, and he hits them with a fundamental that everyone can understand in simple words. Trump does the same thing too.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important thing. Breaking out of that memeplex and speaking in direct moral language. The example, and I always go back to it, is JD Vance again and again and again saying, "I don't give a shit."
Yeah.
Which is sort of a silly thing, right? It's perhaps not the most genteel way to express yourself. But nonetheless, it indicates that sort of Jonathan Bowden-esque stepping over, a rejection of your opponents as moral arbiters whose decision has a weight on you. And to your point about going back to fundamentals, that's actually why it's important to know your stuff, to actually have engaged with it. Sure, not everyone is an intellectual, not everyone is a nerd, but if you are going to speak, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your audience to have done the homework. And I say this as someone who is on the left half of the bell curve for right-wing autists on the internet when it comes to IQ. I'll leave it at that. If you're going to have an opinion, if you're going to say, I am going to put forth an argument, and yet you have done none of the background, you don't actually know what you're talking about. It's like, okay, well, what's the point of you doing this? Sure, you may be an autodidact, you may have some great original idea, but this comes back to our conversation, Karl, about the creative process, about your ability to write, to produce fiction, which is, sure, you might be God's gift to reading composition, but probably not. Just a thought.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be very humble and open to criticism and understanding fundamentally what you're trying to do. What are you trying to accomplish? And so you have to tailor your work, your communication. Like, you might have I have an automatic style, and I have this weird tense thing that I do on first drafts. And I now very aggressively go back and adjust it in edits because I need it to be consistent and coherent, and it allows for a specific flow, and it doesn't, because I don't want my style or whatever I'm doing to get in the way of X percentage of readers who will get caught up in it. Because what I want to do is put my ideas inside them, and anything that prevents that, I have to address. And so when we are talking about ideas, we need to really understand what we're talking about, and we need to communicate clearly. I would counter Mr. Dr. Burden that you may say that you're on the left side of the bell curve, but I think it's a little different than that. if you're actually on the right side of the bell curve, to be effective at communicating to everyone on every phase, every point on that bell curve, you need to be able to communicate clearly and directly using words that people on the left side of it can understand. So it's an important balance, because if the more elaborate and floral and uh, you know, ass wagging your style is, that where you're supposed to be, you have to be right side of the bell curve to even touch it. And we can think of a lot of authors that are that way. What it does is it turns people off because they're like, this is pointless. And it is. It's like James Joyce, right? Um, I wrote when I was in college, I did basically my senior thesis on James Joyce. And I was like, James Joyce is just fucking with us. And he himself said this. And all this attention and all this thought and all this intellectual horsepower have been put into James Joyce. And he's a very smart guy who is just fucking with us. And he himself basically said the same thing. I said it in a slightly nicer way, but my point being is that coherence and simplicity and directness have to be the base of anything that you're trying to communicate. Political ideas, let's all get under one big tent. You have to speak very clearly and concisely. And all the philosophy and theorizing, that's important, but that's not as important as identifying that fundamental, that is your real argument that you're trying to accomplish, because that's the most important thing. When you're when you're basically facing, as Sam Hyde has said, who's a funny man, right? He's a funny man, but he also addresses like the real problems and really the real stakes. If we get this wrong, like, humanity could be fucked. It's entirely possible that we won't be able to recover from the leftist takeover of America. It's entirely possible. We can't know that for sure, but it's entirely possible. At the very least, we wouldn't be able to recover because we talk on the internet about these things, and we make friends with lots of people, and devote a certain amount of time to making friends, and they don't want us to make friends with each other. So yeah.
Well, I just hope, Karl, that you and I are in the same wing of the libtard gulag when it comes to that.
I would have already been. They would just brush like 6 inches of dirt over the pile of 32 ACP brass that I'd be lying in a ditch.
In all seriousness, though, to your point about language communication, style is style, and it exists as a garnish to something that's actually worth saying or worth expressing.
Yes.
Oftentimes it is used as a substitute. This is actually what bothers me a lot about Wes Anderson, in particular, the filmmaker. Is that
absolutely agree.
As time goes on, there's less and less of an actual movie being made and more of just a pastiche of an interesting sort of aesthetic vision Wes Anderson has developed over the course of his career. And so you're sort of just sitting there on it's almost like as who was the great director that said Marvel movies were theme park rides? It's effectively a theme park ride for Brooklynites, for hipsters, for people who want to feel smart about themselves. There's something to that as well with writing, that it can become an exercise in superiority detached from any actual meaning. Look, I use more words than most people. I have a fairly large vocabulary, and there is a utility in specific language. In many, Scorsese, you're right, Javier. That's who I was speaking to. But that specificity of language, which is one of the beautiful things about English and lets you speak to concepts very exactly. That you're not simply the example I believe Tolkien would have used is the difference between a ghost and a spirit. Sort of the same thing, but there's a fine difference meant between the two of them. You can get into something specific there. Well, that's really useful. I'm not saying to discard that, but oftentimes, and Hyde, to give him credit, has mentioned this. It becomes a crutch, and it becomes a cheap way to make yourself seem intelligent at the cost of actually expressing something.
Yes.
And as much as we love to point that out in progressive social institutions and progressive education institutions, whatever you want to say, right-wing guys do it too. Do it quite a bit. Karl, we are coming up on time, and I have a scheduled podcast not too long after this. So we're going to have to sort of bring things to a close. But is there anything you want to say as we sort of wrap up?
Yes. So this ties in themes between all of our things, whether it's 32 caliber handguns, Huey Long, Spanish Civil War. Nobel laureate Ernest Hemingway suffered a severe gash to his forehead when, quote, a skylight fell on him in March 1928 in his Paris apartment. He was treated at the American Hospital of Paris. He later claimed that the physician who treated him was Karl Weiss, Huey Long's assassin. However, Weiss did not start practicing there until 16 months after Hemingway was treated for his probably like getting hit on the head with a bottle by a woman he was trying to rape. So just thought I would share that. It ties the room together that Ernest Hemingway is a prick, which is like basically the primary takeaway from our collective works together.
Not only that, I think every time you and I have spoken, the concept of how both of us hate Ernest Hemingway comes up. It's just a burning, like the thorn in my side.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, man, this was a ton of fun. I enjoy
absolutely
our completely unscheduled live streams. As you guys could probably guess, there was no topic for this past, hey, Karl, are you doing anything tomorrow? Which is exactly how this was planned. But Karl, if people want to find you, where should they look?
The very best place is my Substack, karldahl.substack.com. That's KarlDahl.substack.com. I have 2 books on Amazon, Faction and Faction with the Crusaders. Buy book. Thanks so much.
As far as my stuff, you know where to find me. I should say, if you want episodes early and ad-free, good episodes, not just these random bonus ones that I use.
How dare you?
To get a nice round number of streams for a week. Throw me a few bucks if you don't mind on Patreon or Substack. Not only does that help me do what I do, but it keeps me from needing to take sponsorships. It keeps me from needing to do scummy things. Keeps me accountable to you guys. Look, I'm a full-timer. This is what I do. Really appreciate it. So if you're interested, you do get a benefit in addition to just keeping me around. But Karl, I appreciate it. And everyone, keep your head up. Life can't last forever.